So we have a dichotomy there of that. What other features do we have in a changing environment here on the campus? How many people have seen in the surrounding areas, not so much on campus, again, I'll come back to that, in terms of the dove population? There's a dove now that we have here that is large. It has a broad tail with a white band on it and a white band when it's walking around and it's a white-winged dove. 20 years ago, that dove was not found but sparsely on Bolivar Peninsula and a few isolated areas around here. It was primarily a dove of South Texas, the Valley, and northern Mexico. In the last 10 years, it's been increasing in numbers, and right now I would submit that it almost outnumbers the number of mourning doves in the city. And why is that? Now, you could invoke global warming, climate change, but I think rather there's something else that happened. What happened in 1989? 83, 89, we had rather severe freezes. A large number of the orange groves were killed in South Texas. And then following that, there was an enormous acreage of northern Mexico that was cleared for arable crops, soybeans in particular. So what did that do? That removed their favorite nesting sites in low, dense trees such as orange or mesquite, and they've come here. Now they're in the neighborhoods around the campus, but they're not on the campus. Why? Because the trees were pruned, cleaned out for the cowbirds, and the vegetation is not conducive for white-wing breeding territory. It's a migrant that came here by for reasons of its own habitat, not something we did, but we can now enjoy it as a part of our sort of the ecology of the campus. I told Marilyn Helms week before last, before you started, John, I talked to her that there's another dove that's come in that's quite interesting in this country. It's called a Eurasian collared dove. Anytime you see a light tan, almost milky white dove that has a black collar on it, you can identify one of them 100 yards away. See it. It's different color, different shape. It's somewhere between a white wing and a mourning dove. And it's, as the name implies, was all over Asia, probably the Indian subcontinent. It's gradually migrated and moved all the way over to Japan, through Europe, and then possibly was introduced or carried by winds into Bahamas. From that, now it's spread all over the country. It's again, in the neighborhoods. It's a sucker for bird feeders. And so if you've got a bird feeder, you're probably going to see some of these. Its expansion so far exceeds that other interesting bird that we have in this country that had its origins in Africa, the cattle egret, which first showed up in this country in the 50s, and now it's in almost every state. And the Eurasian collared dove now is exceeding that. So far there's no competition with other species, but it's another interesting thing in our changing environment. I've seen on the campus also a monk parakeet. How many people here live in Bel Air? On Bel Air Avenue B or A, I can't remember. If you hear anything that's raucous as a hell at night, just at sunrise, that's that colony of colonial nesting and roosting monk parakeets. They were first introduced into New York, probably came from Mexico up too. They're primarily fruit eaters, and we don't have any fruit trees, very few on campus, and they don't bother us a lot. Gives you an idea here of what a changing habitat can do in terms of what you see. When we first came here, also, the north side of the campus was covered with a very fragrant flower, the gardenia, a hedge rose, along Rice Boulevard. And it succumbed to a fungal disease and was replaced by privet, ligustrum. And what I'd like to do now is share with you something that plants can do in their own defense. And this is neat, or at least I think so. The privet belongs to the olive family, along with forsythia, ash, lilac, and a large number of other plants. And it has compounds that, for those of you who had chemistry, we'll just say that this is a phenol ring, 6-member benzene ring. It has 2 of those, and then there's some carbons in between, and then there's glucose hanging off of one of these. So you got glucose, phenol, straight chain, and phenol. The phenols are obnoxious in taste, but for an animal that eats this, first of all, they bite it. Doesn't taste bad, they'll continue eating it. But then most animals have a beta-glucosidase, which will lop off the glucose. That's fine. Now it's got phenol straight between it. And then it's got an enzyme called polyphenol oxidase, and it wicks off both of the phenols. And you know what's left? It's glutaraldehyde, which is a longer chain member of formaldehyde. A rather effective way of curing bacterial diseases, fungal diseases that occur. And how many people have ever seen a wax ligustrum that's sick? They live forever. They never die, and nothing ever eats them. Insect larvae that try to eat the things, if they get any protein in the diet, the phenol fixes it, like embalming fluid, and the animal starves to death. So we got trees now that have a unique feature of their own protection, and it tells us why we have so many of them. It reminds me of in our graduate days at Purdue, I had a friend and a colleague at the University of Illinois who actually served on my committee by the name of Gottfried Frankel. In 1959, he was working on chemical defenses in plants. Used to go over to Illinois to have a change, Urbana, to have a change of scenery. And Gottfried was an interesting guy. He taught mainly graduate courses, and he taught every day and every night, and finished all of his courses and then went to the French Riviera the rest of the semester in summer. And he said he was working on flatworms that lived on the beach, but I think he was interested in other things on the beach, on the Riviera, I'm not sure. But when we would go over, you know, at 2 o'clock it was time to have a cognac, either in his office or go to the bar. Gottfried was a lovely guy. But you know what's happened now? Not until the 80s did other people start looking at chemical defenses in plants. He was 30 years, or 20 years ahead of his time in that. Let me mention one other thing. In 1998, we had a rather interesting year biologically on the campus. And the ecology changed because it got very, very noisy. And that was one of the years when we got a summation of the dog-day cicada, or locust, with a variant of a 13 or 17-year cycle of these. And the campus was noisy. And every animal that ate locusts was fat and sassy, because everyone eats locusts. And in particular, there's one that's interesting here on the campus, and it's called a cicada killer. It's a big wasp about this long. And it will grab a cicada, sting it, paralyze it, drag it, or crawl up a tree and glide down with it. It's too heavy to fly with it very far. And in the burrow, she will lay an egg on the larvae, covered up, and the egg will proceed to consume the larvae and develop into a wasp, which will come out the next year and live off of these these annual cycles of locusts. Unless there's another one. How many people ever heard of the cow killer? The velvet ant. This is an animal that's much smaller. It's flaming red color and black. It looks like it's called an ant, but it's really a wasp, and it's wingless. And it comes along, and it has a parasitic life cycle that it finds the nest that the cicada killer constructed, goes in, lays an egg on the pupa of the cicada killer, and does in the cicada killer. It reminds me of what von Beneden said, greater fleas have lesser fleas upon their backs that bite them. You can't get away from the biological cycles in this. One more thing really contrasting what Houston was, what it is now, and what it's meant in terms of pets. How many people have pets? Dogs, cats. Everyone's got them. You know, when the population of Houston was 150,000, roughly that, there weren't too many dogs around. There were coyotes, red wolves. The coyotes were moving in. And the dogs commonly have a parasite called a heartworm, which is distributed, the microfilaria distributed by mosquito bites. Mosquito bites one, goes over and bites the other one. Asa Chandler, parasitologist, Tulane, it was a Gulf Coast disease. Didn't occur anywhere else. We had it here at a low level. No one was particularly concerned about it. Dogs probably died from it. The reservoir was probably the red wolf out in the wild. Then things really started to change, again, in this space and time. It reminds you of the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. All came along. Transportation got easy, moving dogs from one place to the other. That particular anomaly now has moved from a localized Gulf Coast event, common here in Houston when we arrived in '61. It's all over the United States now. Go to the airport, little plastic box, goes in. If it's infected, infects the mosquitoes at the next location, and it's all over the country. We've lived in a changing time. I'm going to leave that one out. I'm getting a little more maudlin here. Well, no, I won't. No, I won't subject you to this. Lyme disease. Familiar with it? Distributed by ticks. Ticks. Who else? Deer. Bears. When it was first discovered, a mutant of a Borrelia, a spirochete bacteria, is 1975 in Lyme, Connecticut. It's now here in the Big Thicket. It's on the west coast, spread by one of the large bear ticks, and it's spread by the deer tick in the northeastern and all the way through the Midwest now. Don't think if you don't have deer in your backyard, don't worry. You better worry about it. It's a bad disease. Can result in heart damage, arthritic involvement of joints, a lot of other things. People in Connecticut found out that primarily the host that really affects the vector is a mosquito, or tick, pardon me. The reservoir host is a deer, but field mice and mice also become infected. Now you got things that are closer to man. Deer come in to eat your petunias, but mice live underneath your house. They found that primarily a field mouse, a white-footed deer mouse, is probably the cardinal reservoir host for this. And that's how it spread so fast in non-deer country and non-bear country. People did an ingenious thing, going back to habitat. Stretch your imagination and think about this. If we wanted to get rid of Lyme disease on the campus, how would we do it? We don't have deer, but we have mice. So they took cotton and they put rotenone, which is an organo compound, a natural pesticide that kills ticks, from a Madeira's plant in South Africa, and they saturated the cotton with that. And then they go out and they throw it around. And deer mice are goofy for cotton. They love to build their nests out of it, but it kills all the ticks on them. So they're still infected, but they can't. Now, I wonder where they got that idea. That's sort of good detective work. That's something that Hercule Poirot would do wonders with. His little gray cells would go crazy in that. But they had a leading thing that comes back to Texas again, and that is screwworm. The worm doesn't look like a screw. It's a maggot of a fly that has a predilection for eating fresh meat. The umbilicus of a newborn calf. The barbar scratch on a calf, cow, or dog. It's invaded and you get a case of myiasis, maggot infestation and the thing. Secondary infection comes along, usually kills the animal. A tremendous problem, especially after the advent of barbed wire in the state. Representatives of the USDA in Florida found that something that they decided. There's one trick in this life history that made it work. That is that the female blowfly only breeds once. And they said, what if we could put out sterile male flies? And a sterile male fly breeds with a virile wild female, end of life cycle. So, unfortunately, probably a lot of wild horses and other animals bit the dust because they had to have fresh meat to feed the flies, and they raised tons of maggots, let them pupate, irradiated them, and if you, in the last 25 years, 30 years, you go through central Texas, and there's little boxes everywhere thrown out of airplanes with these irradiated flies. Works two ways. The females are sterile because they didn't separate sexes in the pupal stage. They irradiated everything. But every time she breeds with a wild male, he's going to run out of steam and have less chance to breed with another female. It's been incredibly successful. It's essentially eradicated the screwworm in that. There's a big project keeping it from invading from Texas, still using it. So throwing the cotton out of the airplane in a distant Lyme, they got their idea from something that occurred here in Texas. And the large maggot factory, there was one of them over in the hill country. Well, has rice changed much over these years? And I would submit that it has. We have a rich biology on campus. To practice yogi's admonition, you shouldn't look at the big picture. Maybe you have to look at the little picture. Why are there so many warblers now that are just crazily going up live oak trees, twig after twig after twig, eating hemipterans that are sucking the sap out of the tree? Beautiful example of it. So zero in on little finer things and big egrets and ibises and things like that. We've got a rich heritage, and we just got to adjust our particular attention to a smaller view. Well, rice has changed in its 89 years. It certainly has during my 40 years here on campus. But so has the world, the United States, Texas, and Houston. Person kind, I'm being politically correct there, is a part of the ecosystems, and folks become a necessary part of the environment.